ask. So yeah, again, we're going to kind of just continue to go into how America gets involved in World War I and the series of decisions that kind of factor into that. So remember that the U.S. policy of isolation is basically one of the most important policies that we have going at this point in time. Now, we are isolated, although we don't really count Latin America and, you know, all of South America and the Philippines. So we're kind of isolated, but not really. Also Hawaii. But we've been over that. But you can see here that you have a picture of all these European nations. They're all brandishing their weapons. They've got swords and guns. They're ready to go to war. And what's the U.S. doing over here? U.S. is just kind of like sitting over here with our gun, like just hanging out, looking at the sunset, right? And so we're kind of just observing and looking and seeing what's really going to happen. We're not trying to become super involved in World War I. And, you know, you kind of stop and just think about the question, you know, like if you're in America at the start of World War I, would you have thought that this conflict in Europe is relevant to you at all? Does it concern you at all? It's a half a world away. It's kind of irrelevant thing. It's kind of irrelevant to your day-to-day life. Most people thought that the last thing America should do was, you know, kind of get involved in these problems that seem to be never ending in Europe, right? Like we broke away from Europe. We don't want to be involved in all their drama. And so it's kind of hard to look at all the destruction and things that are going on and just kind of be like, well, that's not our problem. But we have our own problems. We've got workers' rights. We've got figuring out, you know, who should be voting, who shouldn't be voting. We've got Latin America. And so when all of this war breaks out in Europe and the Americans hear all these sorts of information and stories, they don't have great sources on it, but, you know, as Americans, they're kind of like, yeah, that sounds bad, but that's kind of their problem. Like, they can deal with that. That's not my problem. And so that has a big, that's kind of the backdrop of what's going on before the U.S. kind of gets dragged by our feet into it. Now, in 1916, President Wilson pledges that he is not going to intervene. He pledges non-intervention. And the bottom line, you know, is that the Americans see very little national interest, national stake in the war. And at an individual level, they just don't see how it would benefit them to get involved. It seems completely pointless. And Wilson initially agrees. And so when the war breaks out in 1914, even as late as 1916, he is still pledging, hey, we're not going to get involved in this, right? But there's another side to this that we kind of have to think about for a minute. And that is the fact that the British are basically the only source of news on this war that America is getting. And of course, if the only source that you're getting news from is a person who has an interest in the war, you're probably going to get a lot of propaganda. So the British are making it seem really bad, like they're doing really bad, because they're trying to get sympathy from the American public. And you end up with a lot of conspiracy theories. And but it's really just this good British PR machine. And they're trying to make the Central Powers, who are their enemies, the British are trying to make them look bad. They're trying to get Americans to read those stories in order to get them on board. Eventually, they kind of start pushing this idea that Kaiser Wilhelm is, you know, this villainous person. He's the Chancellor of Germany, and that he's the one who's being aggressive, and that it was Germany invading Belgium that really did all of this, and they escalated it. But all of that's kind of a lie, because realistically, Britain was really the one pulling everybody's strings. Britain was the one that put everybody at tension. Britain was the one that was dominating everybody's navy, setting up colonies all over the world, trying to take all the resources from everywhere. So Britain's being like, oh, we're the victim, we're the victim. And in reality, they were pretty much one of the main reasons, the way that they were acting was one of the main reasons that World War I broke out in the first place. They were trying to be in control of everybody. And that made people want to push back. But, again, you look at this fella, he looks like a villain a little bit, you know. So they kind of sell this. Now, the Germans then don't help themselves. They begin to use what's called unrestricted submarine warfare. And it's one of the biggest decisions that gets America to pay attention much more than they had been. Because shortly after the war starts, Germany declares the British Isles a war zone. And basically they said that any ships that are in those waters around the British Isles, regardless whether they're a warship or whatever, are targets of German submarines. And we're going to sink them. Passenger boats, whoever. We don't care. We're sinking them. And that meant that U.S. ships, of course, are also going to be targets. And so the U.S., while we're not getting involved, we are friends with Britain. And we're sending them supplies and we're doing all this stuff. And the Germans start sinking our ships. And the U.S. is opposed to this. They say this is the violation of rights of, neutral nations. We're not sending war aid. We're just sending food and like medical supplies. You have no right to sink our ships, and we should be able to go wherever we want. Germans, stop sinking our ships. And the Germans are like, nein, we are not going to stop sinking your boats. Stop sending them over here. If you send them into the water around Great Britain, we are going to pew, pew, pew with the submarines, and they are going to sink. It's going to be amazing. And you can kind of guess, where this is going. The Germans are going to sink a lot of boats, including one big boat that had a lot to do with, the U.S. getting involved, called the USS Lusitania. Now, this happens on May 7th of 1915. The boat is called the Lusitania, sunk by a German submarine, kills somewhere around 1,200 people dead. Of course. Kills them dead. There's no other way to kill them. And it's right off the coast of Ireland. The boat sinks like in 15 minutes. So very few people are able to even get to the life rafts. I mean, you're talking 1,300 people somewhere close to that die. It's a huge crisis. But remember, the war starts in 1914. The Lusitania starts in 1915. We still don't join the war. Okay? 1916, we said, Wilson's still saying, oh, we're not getting involved. Now, if you've grown up, has anybody ever heard of the Lusitania before? Has that ever been mentioned in any American history class or something like that? So in a lot of classes growing up, what I heard in history class was like, oh, they sank the Lusitania, and that's why America joined the war. Well, clearly not, because they don't join the war for like 2 years after this, okay? If it was just because of the Lusitania, then we would have joined the war. But again, it wasn't. But what it did show was that America was saying, hey, we can't just allow this to keep going. And it does pique people's interest and starts to turn the tide of American sentiment towards joining the war, okay? They're still not all on board, and it's going to take another 2 years pretty much before the majority of Americans are like, screw those Germans, bunch of jerks. And then we're going to join the war and kill everybody. But the Germans are like, well, we know that you are sending supplies. How are we supposed to know that they were Band-Aids and not bullets? Which is a good question, honestly, because, we were all like, this boat was for passengers, but we also had like a bunch of weapons and stuff that we were sending. So we were definitely on the sneak trying to send weapons to Great Britain. We weren't telling people we were sending munitions and stuff, but the Lusitania, the cargo hold, was full of guns and ammo and artillery shells and all this stuff. Like, we were definitely sending weapons. So the Germans sank it like, sorry to those 1,300 people, but the Americans put them at risk by, loading it up with weapons too. So it's kind of hard to wrap our minds around the fact that basically they're just sinking everything that's out there. You hit my battleship, yeah. Pew pew. We sink your destroyer. I like talking like that. It's fun. Anyways, of the nearly 2,000 passengers, roughly 1,200 are killed. And so, yeah, that was bad. once we do declare war, this becomes a major part of the PR propaganda campaign to get people to enlist. So, 2 years later, we're like putting pictures of like women holding babies drowning to death in the Lusitania. We're like, enlist or you're going to drown more babies. So that's kind of manipulation and sad. And so the British are also going to start, of course, doing this and attacking the German unrestricted warfare and using the Lusitania as propaganda to try and get people to enlist. Now, Wilson does two main things. He pledges non-intervention. He also adopts what he called the preparedness policy. So, hey, we're not going to get involved. But at the same time, he's telling the military leaders, like, hey, we should start getting people in the military and also build some guns. So, I'm not saying that we should get involved, but it doesn't look as though, like, we're going to be able to stay out of this forever. Okay? And so, the Germans have kind of woke up this sleeping giant in a lot of ways. And so the Germans realize, oh, America, they get some reports like America's starting to get some weapon factories going. Like, they may be getting involved. And Germans like, yeah, please don't do that. We really don't want you to come into the war. So we promise no more pew-pew on your boats, okay? And so they're like, make this promise. We're not going to sink any more boats. Of course, they lied. They start sinking boats almost immediately after they promised not to. And so America is eventually going to definitely have to get involved. And then there's a defining moment. It's not the sinking of the Lusitania, but it's this, the Zimmermann Telegraph. In January of 1917, Arthur Zimmermann, a German foreign secretary, kind of like our Secretary of State, sends a message to Mexico. Now again, y'all remember what happened with Cuba? We might have sunk our own boats. And then we blamed it on Spain because we wanted to go invade Cuba and kick the crap out of Spain. And then there was that message that like came from Spain that said like the president's a moron, they're so stupid, they can't beat us. And that got leaked to the press, right? Quote unquote, from Spain. Well, the Zimmermann Telegraph, it's like they went to the same gimmick. So, here's how it works. The Secretary of Germany, Secretary of State, sends a message to Mexico. And the message basically says, hey, we're going to go back to unrestricted warfare, but we want you to keep the United States occupied and keep them neutral. So here's what we're going to do. Mexico, you join an alliance with us, and then y'all declare war on America so that they don't come over to Europe and attack us. And as soon as we wrap up the war in Europe, we'll come over there and help you defeat the United States, and then you'll get a bunch of land in the United States. Friends? And they say they're going to make peace, right? Now, who finds this letter? The British again. The British found the Spanish letter. How about, well, that's weird. Now the British found another letter that was basically the exact same thing. And guess what happens? They leak it to the American public. And then the American public, just like when it happened in Cuba, get all like, oh, those Germans, they're trying to get Mexico to attack us. Roar, go to war. And all the people that make weapons and stuff are like, yes, yes, go to war, yes. Right? So, take that as you want. It's kind of dumb. This was the actual telegraph. They're like, and then we send it in Western Union. It's like, yeah, that's secure.
So how did they intercept the message?
Intercepting a telegraph is pretty easy. You take the telegraph line, and then you hook your own line up to it, and then you'll get the same message as the person that they're sending it to.
Can they stop it from sending it to the other person?
No, it's electricity, bro. Once you hit, boop, it's gone forever. Yeah. So, they're going to get, Mexico should attack, and then they're going to get involved to help Mexico defeat the U.S., so Mexico can take all the American Southwest back that they had lost. Naturally, this is not going to go well. They promised Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back to Mexico. Yeah, right. I love how Germany promised Mexico to give them territory that had already beat them in a war and declared independence for themselves. That's hilarious. Stupid Germans. They don't even understand Texas. Good luck trying to give Texas back to Mexico. Yeah, okay. Idiots. Well, this is going to piss us off a lot, and we end up entering the war in 1917. And Wilson is going to, sort of phrase it and spin it and say, oh, this is war for democracy now, of course, because that's what we say every time we want to do something that we probably shouldn't be doing based on a lie that we know is a lie. This is for democracy. It's different than in World War II where Hitler is clearly a villain. This is really just like territory disputes and people being pissed off at France and Great Britain for picking on them for all this time. I mean, these countries want to be independent, and Britain's like, no, I don't think you should be independent. That doesn't work into our plan. And they're like, no, I think we should be independent. You don't get to tell us what to do. You're just a country. So it's not like a clear villain necessarily, but they declare war on April 6th of 1917, and 3 million soldiers get drafted. So we're going to have a lot of soldiers now. Congress actually approves the war effort in a vote, and so it's a resounding vote for it, but it's not unanimous. There's still quite a few people that are like, we might be getting lied to. This could be fake news, like maybe y'all are just trying to pull us into a war that we don't really want to be in. I don't like it, and so some people vote no, as opposed to like when we get into World War II after Pearl Harbor, it's like 434 to 1. Like, there's like one person that votes against going to war in World War II, but he's like a Quaker and a pacifist. He's like, I cannot vote for war. Okay, dude. But basically, April, they declare war, and it's going to really play out pretty roughly for Germany. Okay?